Well, it's just me today, Rob Hunter, hanging out with you. Mike Russell has the well-deserved day off, so you know what happens when Mike Russell is not here. We're going to play. We got a theory for you today about narratives and how they work and how they influence you. Welcome to Russell and Hunter's The Brewmance. So glad that you're here with us. Thank you. It is Friday. We are out here. We are having fun, and we've got some big things to talk about today. No question about that. And some of those big things involve the stories that you hear, every single day when it comes to politics. And those stories are what influences us. So I have a theory. On my stepping away from radio, I am a communications expert, strategist, coach. I help people communicate more effectively, but not just that, to understand how outside influences impact you, how they mess with your brain, so to speak. Hello, Greg. Good to see you. I see Greg Meekin in the chat room. By the way, the chat room is open. It's always open. Mike and I, when we're both here together, we can see everything that you guys write, whether it be on Facebook or whether it be on YouTube. I'm not sure if Twitter, X, has a similar feature where if you comment on the live video that we can see it, but try it out if you're watching on X. I also encourage you to share this out because what we're going to talk about today is very important in my view because of how stories are shaped and how they shape us. And I think it's very important to have these conversations because it helps us understand what we're influenced by. And then we can make our own choices and then we can create our own narratives. Have you seen the movie Training Day? Fantastic movie starring Denzel Washington. And there's a scene at the very beginning of the movie that I think sums up where we're at when it comes to covering news, when it comes to talking about news, when it comes to talking about politics.
Your mouth shut long enough.
So there's Denzel. He is the officer. There's going to be a swear word in this. I just want to give you a caution, but important that I leave the swear word in there. And he's talking to Ethan Hawke's character. Ethan Hawke's a rookie cop. He's going to go on this undercover mission with Denzel, learn the streets of L.A., and disrupt the crime scene. So he meets Denzel, Ethan Hawke, at this diner, their very first meeting. And this is how it shapes out in their first interaction.
Read my paper. Tell me a story.
I don't think I know any stories.
You don't know any stories?
No.
All right, I'll tell you a story. This is a newspaper, right? It's 90% bullshit, but it's entertaining. That's why I read it, because it entertains me. You won't let me read it. So you entertain me with your bullshit. Tell me a story right now. Go.
Tell me a story right now. Go. Because he's looking at this newspaper and he looks at it as entertainment. And that's really what our political discussion, our discourse has become. No matter which platform you're watching us on, whether it be YouTube, whether it be X, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Instagram, there's always a narrative that is being pushed to try to influence you to buy something, influence you to vote a certain way, influence you to think a certain way. And when you think about what Denzel said, that 90% of it is just flat out not true, well, you start to understand what's being sold to you, what's being said to you. And if you pick up on any of this stuff, please, throw it in the chat, share this video out because it is incredibly important to have this conversation. Do you guys know who Scott Adams is? This guy right here is the author of the Dilbert cartoons. And he got in a lot of trouble in 2016 because he came out and he said that Donald Trump was going to win. And he made this whole entire case. And he explains it in one of his books, Scott Adams, this guy that you're seeing right here on your screen. Scott Adams is explaining that he picked Trump to win because the media said Hillary Clinton had a 99% chance to win that election. So he explained that, nope, Trump's going to win because he knew by taking that position, it would cause a counter narrative to the narrative that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And then Scott Adams not only becomes famous for Dilbert cartoons, but because famous for analyzing that Trump is going to win. So he puts out a video today, Scott Adams does, and it goes right to your point, Lynn, that you cannot be brainwashed. I'm brainless. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's really the reality of America. We've all become brainless. So we don't have the ability to think beyond what fills up our space in our brain. And Brendan, you might be right. The BS meter that Denzel was talking about, if you caught the clip from Training Day, probably has gone up beyond 90%. But Denzel called it in that movie that 90% of what's in the newspaper is BS, made up. It's a narrative. It's a story. That's what we're getting at here. Hello, Rhonda. How are you? Good to see you. So let's go to Scott Adams here because he's going to explain this. He has a background as a hypnotist, too, and how hypnotism works. So listen to this, and let's have a conversation about
politics is that people have different priorities and preferences, and they're trying to argue it out in the political field. As a hypnotist, I can see that nothing like that is happening.
See? Oh, think about that. This is how we normally perceive things, myself included. And one of the reasons why I struggled at the end of my time at KFYI is because I didn't want to be part of a narrative, especially because it's not the narrative that I want to tell you, which is about personal freedom. Because the reason I bring all of this up is the concept of personal freedom, which I think is the most important concept that there is. It's hard to find. It's hard to do. It takes work, effort. And it's easy to get distracted nowadays. I mean, I hold up my phone on this all the time. I'll do it again for you, just so you can see the Brewman's pop socket right there. You got to love that. That was a gift from my little brother right there. Still holding on strong. I think this is my second one because, it was a perfect thing. Just have one of these in the back of your phone. Boom. I don't know. Maybe we'll reinstitute those and we can have them so that you guys can rock your Brewmance. Because ultimately, what Mike and I decided to do when we started the Brewmance was offer a different narrative that you're not seeing, that you're not getting, that might get you to think a different way, which is why I'm honest in telling you about both candidates. Right now, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump. I don't like either one of them. I like some things about each one of them. And usually that's where we find ourselves in the politics. And as Scott Adams is saying here is that that's pretty much how we accept it, that there's a right and a left, and boom, this is what we do. So Scott Adams continues that is actually not what's happening here. Watch this breakdown.
There's an entire artificial layer that's preventing you from seeing what's really happening. Over on the Democrat.
So think about that. So what he's saying is the narrative that you see, and you guys write in the chat, Rhonda, Brendan, Greg, Lynn, write in the chat where you get most of your news from. What's the source that you go to? So, for example, when the assassination attempt happened to Donald Trump a couple weeks ago, where did you go to get your news information and get updates? I'd be real curious about that because that plays a role in this narrative here as we're going to try to break ourselves free from it. So back to Scott Adams here, talking about the narrative that is an artificial layer.
Side, which is quite different.
So now he's talking about the Democrats, which is different from the Republicans.
From the Republican side. You've got some combination of brainwashers that literally include the CIA and people who have been trained by it. You've got the captured media, everything from ABC, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, etc., CNN. And these are literally working together as a team with Democrat leaders, and of course, big tech, with the exception of X. Collectively, the skill level in brainwashing.
Check this out right here. So what Scott Adams is saying is you got the CIA. He calls it the captured media. And we often talk about that media circle, right? This is the media circle that is steadily changing their minds about Kamala Harris. And Rhonda, I do see your question about what do I like about Kamala Harris? I'll get to that here in just a second because it is a good question. Here's this, though, which is what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, right? I'm going to back this up a little bit. I apologize. This is Jonah Goldberg appearing on CNN, setting this entire video up. This is all about narrative.
She was put in charge of the border.
Nope. She was in charge of reaching out to the South and Central American countries to stem the immigration.
She wasn't the border czar.
She was not actually the border czar.
She is not the border czar.
She was never border czar.
She was not the border czar.
All right, I think we all get that, right? She was not the border czar. She was the border czar. She is the border czar. Point is, one of her point duties as vice president was to oversee the border, which she did not do. Did a terrible job. That is obvious. But the media running cover. So Axios, the website, Axios.com, which I enjoy reading because it's quick. It gives you bullet points and it shoots out really quick and easy digestible information. They put out a story, I think it was in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, in which they called Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, the border czar. They have now come back 3 years later and issued a correction and said, oh, no, it was not appropriate for us to call Kamala the border czar. Aha, gotcha. Okay. So you see the media creating this narrative that Scott Adams is talking about, which we're going to go back to here in just a second. But before that, what do I like about Kamala? Honestly, I like the story. Do I think that it is a perfect story? No. But stories work. They work for our brains. They help us understand things. And the selling of this story is really what I think is going to help Kamala be competitive in this race. And something else, Kamala's not to be underestimated. A lot of people just underestimated her. She's dumb, can't speak off the cuff, and a lot of that is true. But here's what Kamala did. As soon as Joe Biden called her and said, Kamala, I'm out. You're up. What she did is she got her team. They were all together, and they just blasted the phones. Kamala spent 10 hours on Sunday on the phone, securing support of leaders all across the party to make it a done deal. It didn't even give anyone else a chance to step into this race because Kamala, as a prosecutor, is very effective. I don't agree with her methods. I don't agree that she obviously put a lot of minorities, people of color in jail for little crap offenses, marijuana being one of them. But this is part of this overall conversation is the story becomes part of the narrative. The rewriting of the border czar becomes part of the narrative, to Scott Adams' point, because he saw it with the Hunter Biden laptop story. Hunter Biden laptop story, we all know. It was a real laptop. There was some really damaging information, not only about Hunter Biden on those laptops, but about the Biden family. 51 former spies, CIA employees, etc., including the once top dog, John Brennan, came out and said, this laptop story has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. You've heard the story most likely. Narrative. CIA, right? So CIA goes to the media. The media trusts the CIA. And this is a big part of the problem right here. This is a big part of the challenge. Big part of the challenge in America is part of the narrative, the captured media, is still under the impression that the federal government tells them the truth and that they ought to believe the federal government. Now, part of that is personal because journalists want access. They don't want to rock the boat too much because that's not their job. So they go along with this and they sell you a story that they want you to believe, which is why it's important to be like Grizz. Oh, I almost forgot that I could put your comments right here on the screen. That's the way to do it. Because the whole point in all of this is how both sides, all sides, every side tries to distract you, tries to do the thinking for you, tries to lead you to water, so to speak, because politics is about persuasion at the end of the day. Because what's the most important thing in politics? Well, for you and me, it's winning. For them, it's about being able to spend the money. Spend that money, your money, taxpayer money, however they want, wherever they want. So the best bet is to be like Grizz. Taking a bunch of information, figure it out for yourself, and understand, going back to Denzel, that 90% of what you hear on both sides is story building, is BS. And of course, Jim, we appreciate this. And I saw Greg said that. Jim also likes Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA. All good stuff. Because there's a good one too. Because I don't know if you guys have read any of Bill O'Reilly's books. I have Killing the Mob right over here. I was going to grab it, but I grab enough books. O'Reilly calls it like he sees it. I think he leans right, but not too far right. And he calls it pretty well right down the middle. Kind of looks at the facts, backs things up. He had some really good reporting on Biden stepping down and all those things. But I want to understand, because I'm going through this process myself. And this was a process for me as a young talk show host I brought up before the Iraq War. I was a young baby talk show host 2003, got my first talk show, America Invades Iraq. And in doing some fill-in work prior to getting my show in New Orleans, I advocated for the war because the government told me I should advocate for the war. So I listened and I parroted that narrative. Well, now I understand that it's a narrative. And I understand how the game works now. Pat Tillman is another example. Story of Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman's obviously a hero. He left the NFL, served for his country became an Army Ranger, if I'm not mistaken. That was the Special Forces branch he went into. And he went over to Afghanistan, and he was killed. And the immediate story that came out, Pat Tillman's killed by enemy fighters in Afghanistan. Well, that was a lie, a narrative. A narrative to try to keep support up for the war. Because when you lose a hero, a guy that leaves the NFL to go serve his country, not a good look. Especially when it turns out it was friendly fire. Especially it turns out even worse because Pat Tillman started to question the narratives, particularly about the Iraq war. And all of a sudden he's dead. And they make a hero out of him. Why? Who does that benefit? The powers that be. People creating the narrative. So for me, the Republican narrative bubble popped right around that time. And then you guys know how much I love to look at the history of the FBI and how unconstitutional that has been. Because I realized that the public relations effort to create the narrative that the FBI is on top of things, the FBI follows the Constitution, the FBI loves America. Well, it turns out that's really not what that agency is. So you can see how the narrative impacts you. Because the narrative, as an American, is that you're always supposed to support your military and you're always supposed to support your law enforcement. Always is a bad look. Because, again, there's that thin blue line and there's supporting the cops, and that's great. But you have to still be willing to call out the cops, including the FBI, when they get it wrong. And Jim's got a point here, too, right? That this seems to be true, that the FBI and CIA are run by power-hungry humans. I would even add something to that, Jim, and I would say that they're not just power-hungry. They think they're smart enough to control the world. That as long as they get to do what they do, the world is a better place. It's safer from terrorism and all these things. That is also a narrative. Also a narrative because it works. It infects our brain. As I say, language is contagious. This is what I teach people in my communication classes and my one-on-one coaching. Language is contagious. So let's go back to it. Scott Adams, Dilbert cartoon, put out this video as a hypnotist. He's got a background as a hypnotist. He's sharing how hypnotized brains work. So he's talking about how the CIA, the captured media, the Democrat Party work in unison to sell you a narrative. Ready? Let's go back to this here.
Is weapons grade, literally weapons grade. It's the same techniques used by the CIA to overthrow other countries. It's just being used internally at the moment.
Uh-oh.
So
hold on. I'm going to play that again. Let's see if I can back it up to the right spot here. So he's got the CIA, the captured media, big tech. They team up with the Democrats.
With the exception of X. Collectively, the skill level in brainwashing that they demonstrate is weapons grade.
Mm-hmm.
Literally weapons grade.
And
it's the same techniques used by the CIA to overthrow other countries. It's just being used internally at the moment.
Pause it right there. Does that feel true? Hunter Biden laptop story? The whole Russian dossier from Trump in 2016? Yes. This is really happening, and it's really working because of what Scott Adams is saying. The CIA for years has done this everywhere else around the world, tried to control governments, organizations, etc., to get the outcome that we want. And we, isn't we, as in you and me, it's we as in the power structure that is. And then they sell you the narrative. And where is this point here, Rhonda, that you made? So the FBI is questionable lately. I would even go back to the very beginning of the FBI and question their very existence and their tactics and strategies. But what you saw about the Secret Service is exactly what we're talking about, Rhonda. You saw the narrative that the Secret Service was top. Cream of the crop. Got it under control. They're the best organization out there left in the government. Obviously not. I learned today, and again, I don't know this to be 100% fact. It's all part of narrative, but it seems like it would happen. So I don't know if you've seen the video. Congressman Eli Crane from Tucson, former Navy SEAL, I've met him, owns a company called Bottle Breacher, took a trip out to Butler, Pennsylvania, and got to tour the fairgrounds where the assassination attempt happened. He was in a second-story building, or two-story building, Yeah, Jim, I do see that. Jim says, be careful, they're listening, whatever. It's at this point, it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk to try to tell you guys the truth that you can find your own personal freedom outside of these narratives because your personal freedom is really one of the only things that you can control. We can't control the Secret Service. We can't control the FBI, the CIA. Can't control any of this stuff. But we can control how we react to all of it. So to go back to Scott Adams, right? Getting this message, this coordinated message that millions of people will believe. And then there's going to be the other side, which comes up too. Same idea. Language is contagious. The language you listen to, the language you read, is the language that sits in your brain, circles around and around and around. And it's so easy to get more of the same thing by just pressing a button. Boop, 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 boop. And it sucks you in. Guys with me so far? Seems like it. I love these comments. Keep them coming here because this is part of it. We're all influenced by outside forces. So Scott Adams continues, weapons grade is how he's calling this propaganda effort by Team Left.
Moment. So as a result, Democrat voters, like all voters, are brainwashed. But they're brainwashed with a weapons grade kind of brainwashing that you can see from the outside, but they certainly cannot see from the inside.
Hence why you see the media running away from border czar, running away from Kamala, running away from all those things.
It wouldn't be brainwashing if they knew it was happening. There's a different kind of brainwashing happening on the Republican side, which is, I'm going to call it commercial grade, which is just a level below the weapons grade.
So check that out, right? So now you're getting into X. I've been spending a lot of time on X in the last couple of weeks since the Trump assassination because the information comes in fast. And there's certain Twitterers, Xers, I don't know what they're called, influencers on Twitter that carry the Trump flag, that are part of the narrative on the other side that Scott Adams is talking about here. Check this out.
And it's basically a combination of forces that are not organized. One of them is individuals come up with a conspiracy theory and other people say, I like that. And then it spreads. Or the Hannitys of the world who have a show, which he doesn't hide the fact that he takes a side and he's promoting his side. But if you don't understand that he's doing it as part of the entertainment package, you could easily be hypnotized and brainwashed to think that everything he says is correct and that he's not leaving out any context. He's leaving out some context. Even if you agree with him, he's not trying to show you both sides.
Bingo. And that's where it becomes a narrative. And there is not really any of that anymore. People that show you both sides. I try to do it as effectively as I can because, again, where I'm at personally as an advocate for personal freedom is that I get to choose what I want to do with my life, so long as it doesn't interfere illegally with your life. I can't move into your house. I can't steal your stuff. I can't punch you in the face. I mean, I can do all those things, but there are punishments for doing so. So for me, I look at many on the right, and there's a lot of agreement there that Rob, Grizz, Rhonda, Brendan, Jim, Greg, you guys should be allowed to live the life that you want. That's freedom. You should be allowed to think the way that you want, say the things that you want, even if I don't agree with them. So there's part there I agree. But then the Republicans get all into the moral issues and start using government to try to enforce what they think is the right way to live, which to me is anti-freedom. So to go to that point, Rhonda, that you asked about what do I like about Democrats and Kamala, sometimes they actually stand for freedom, more so than our side. When it comes to a woman's right to choose, again, it's not something I care to get into, talk about, agree with, disagree with. But just because I might have a belief system, I might believe in, say, a God and have a moral, what do I want to say, a moral realm that I live in around that God, that doesn't mean I get to make it a law. Because not everybody believes what I believe, and that's the whole great point about America, that not everybody believes the same thing, yet we all collectively exist and figure it out. So that is part where I look at the Democrats and I go, on social issues, they ain't trying to mandate that I have to be this or be that. I mean, there's already some Republicans are talking about gay marriage. Like, okay, I thought that ship had sailed a long time ago. Or Obama's gay. Okay, what if he is? So what? Fooled us. Because there's that moral attachment that both sides and both narratives try to convince you we need to use the government to enforce our way. And what Scott Adams is talking about is the Democrats' narrative is better because it comes from trained people that have studied psychologists that have figured out how your brain works. And it really works very simple. Appeal to our base instincts. Base instincts are scarcity, fear. Because back in the day, I always loved to bring this. If you were like the first human and you're like, what is going on here? What am I doing? You'd have some natural instincts, but oftentimes you're not going to know what plants to eat, what berries to eat, what animals might kill you. So you have this innate sense of fear that keeps you alive. But as we've evolved, life has become much safer. We sleep in houses for the most part, apartments, whatever, protected from the elements. We're not running around with lions and tigers. We're living. But that fear still works. And one great way to get in there, guilt and shame. And this goes into Scott Adams's point about brainwashing. Because if you brainwash me with guilt and threaten that I'll be outcast from my group, if I believe a certain thing, I'm going to conform. Conformity is a big thing. And you see that definitely on both sides. And again, this isn't an advocation of who you should vote for or who you shouldn't vote for. You get to make that choice. I'm just trying to simply explain to you that both sides try to do the same thing to you, to appeal to that base instinct, to use that reptilian brain to sell you something. One of my favorite ones to talk about is the war on drugs. The history of the war on drugs goes back to 1970. Richard Nixon was desperate for a domestic political win because the Vietnam War was not going well. There were protests. So what did Nixon decide to do? Create criminals in the United States and use drugs as the background.
Congress to provide the legislative authority.
I just pulled a Mike Russell there. Hold on a second. Check this out. And again, I'm going to remind you guys, share this out, because how do we break the political narratives? Create our own. You guys have access to the chat. You can put your comments in the entire show. Not many shows get to do that. We get to do that. And if we want to break narratives and really talk about personal freedom that extend beyond the government and the parties, this is the way to do it. So if you get a chance, just hit that share button, share it out, or invite a friend. Maybe it's not right now while we're live, but while you're hanging out this weekend, be like, you know what? My buddy Bill likes to pop narratives. I'm going to send him this. Send him some Russell and Hunter. But let's go back to Nixon here. In 1970, setting up the war on drugs.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive.
No, say it ain't so, Tricky Dicky. Say it ain't so. Now, I bring this up because Nixon is trying to create a narrative that he's tough on crime, that he's going after drug abusers, because he's trying to distract the country from focusing on Vietnam. He's trying to distract the media from focusing on Vietnam because Vietnam makes him look bad. And it worked. Nixon went on to demolish his opponent in the 1972 re-election campaign. It was, I think, the biggest electoral victory ever, even bigger than Reagan's in 84. I think one state, was it Humphrey? He won his home state of Minnesota or something like that. And it was the only state. So it worked. But that's why it's done. And you can see the consequences of Nixon's comment now, 54 years later. Many, many, many trillions of dollars are spent beefing up law enforcement. The prison population in America went from 350,000 in 1970 to 2.5 million or so today. All because of a narrative. And what is it based on? Fear. Based on fear. So you sell fear as a narrative so that you, Greg Meekin, you, Brendan, you, Rhonda Crawford, you, Grizz, you, Jim, scared of the inner cities where the drug activity is. And then, of course, after Nixon, a decade later, Ronald Reagan becomes the president of the United States in 1982. He does the same thing, except he takes it a step further, demonizes inner cities, and Congress, desperate for their own reelection, they jump on board and they say, yes, we have to ramp up the fear of places like the Bronx in New York City. Or if you look at old footage from the late 70s and 80s, the Bronx was a disaster. Abandoned buildings because of not only poor economic conditions and lack of economic opportunity and poor education systems, but crack. Crack cocaine, same as cocaine. It's just you smoke it instead of crush it up into a powder and snort it up your nose. Traditionally, white folks, Wall Street folks, frat boys use cocaine. Crack, cheaper, more readily available in the inner cities, smoked by people of color, mostly black people. Because of those poor conditions, it was an escape. It was a way out. So you take a section of the city, you make it terrifying to go there, and you give people like us the impression that there's a war zone going on in the Bronx. And maybe that's true. And there's multiple reasons why. But as a voter, all you think about is, oh my God, that might come to my neighborhood. So I have to vote for these big police policies and the politicians that support them so that my community is safe. Look, y'all, they do that to brainwash you, as Scott Adams suggested. The crime is a constant go-to for Republicans. Trump's using it now. I never see crime in my little neighborhood in Phoenix, and I probably live closer to what do they call now, economically disadvantaged place than most people. Like I live half a mile away. Completely different economic situation. I went on my latest episode of Equal Matters, my solo podcast. Mike brings you the Go Show every day at 11. Every couple weeks or so, I put out a new podcast, solo podcast, because I'm trying to disrupt narratives. So I took my microphones, met up with my friend, Representative Annalise Ortiz, who is progressive by all means. She's young, but she puts the work in, y'all, knocking on doors. And because Maryvale in Phoenix is one of those communities where the fear is ramped up, that there's a big narrative around, there's brainwashing around, I wanted to go see it. What does it look like? Am I going to get shot? Are there people using drugs in the middle of the street? None of that was true. We went on a Sunday night. It was pleasant. It was peaceful. Maryvale has great personality. There's some really awesome homes and customizations that people have done to their homes. And what do they care about in Maryvale? Speed humps. My neighborhood has some. There's a main street that runs, it's not really a main street, but it runs kind of in front of my house. There's I think there's 4 or 5 speed bumps on that street. Maryvale doesn't have them, but the neighbors that live there see many people speeding down the street. That seems one of those things that should be pretty easy to solve. They cost like $3,600 in the city of Phoenix for a speed hump. Residents have to pay a little bit. It's wild to think that that's the issue that came up first when I was talking to Representative Ortiz. That's outside the narrative. Because ultimately, everybody wants to live their best life. The narrative says that you can live your best life if and only if a politician is elected. So, for example, part of Trump's narrative is strength. I'll protect you. I won't go to war. I'll end the war in Ukraine. I'll take care of it. I'll end the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And the second part of Trump's narrative is economic. And he's going to bring gas prices down. He's going to bring prices at the grocery store down. And that sounds great, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a while. So if you're looking to that narrative for relief, are you going to get it? And on the Democrat side, right, to go back to the story, that this is historic, that it's the prosecutor, Kamala Harris's background, when she was the district attorney in San Francisco. And before that, she was a prosecutor. It's the prosecutor versus the convict, right? That's the story. That's the story. My mic's in and out, huh? Okay. And I'm not sure. Let's see what I can do. I'm going to press some buttons here and see how that goes. Let me know if that keeps up, and we can see what else we can do here. But the narrative part, to go back to it, I pulled this quote, and I read it to you guys a couple of weeks ago, and I've repeated it a couple times since. So I thought I'd actually take a picture of it so you can actually read it. This is Chuck Palahniuk. He's the author of Fight Club, amongst other things. This is really how a narrative works, especially when you combine it with technology. Big Brother isn't watching, and Big Brother famous from 1984, right? Big Brother is watching everything. To go to Jim, your point that they're watching, they're listening. Of course they are. Of course they are. Which is why it's more important than ever that we establish our own personal freedom outside of these narratives so that we're not influenced by nonsense. Big Brother isn't watching. He's singing and dancing, says Palahniuk, pulling rabbits out of a hat, busy holding your attention every moment you're awake. That's the key right there, right? Especially kids. I mean, look at kids. Since the explosion of smartphones in 2011, 1 in 3 kids suffers from severe depression. 1 in 3 across all socioeconomic backgrounds, races, neighborhoods. 1 in 3. It is consistent. That's this right here. Because this thing has the ability to capture most of your attention every moment you're awake, as Palahniuk writes. Big Brother's making sure you're always distracted, making sure you're fully absorbed, making sure your imagination withers. That's going back to Scott Adams' point about brainwashing. Let's say you have, again, everything's about resources. Whether we talk about government, whether we talk about you. You've got 100% energy reserve. Maybe for you, it's 15 hours a day. Maybe it's 8 hours a day. Maybe it's 18 hours a day. But you have a limit on the amount of things that you can do. If the resources that you have are spent fully absorbed listening to political narratives, you don't have any room for your imagination. That's what Palahniuk is saying here. It becomes as useful as your appendix, making sure your attention is always filled. And this being fed, it's worse than being watched. With the world always filling you, no one has to worry about what's in your mind, because there's no free thought, which if you look at every text about living in a society, this is what they say. This is what they want to control. That's the narrative. That's what you have to be cognizant of. How it pulls you. How it sucks you in. And how it becomes really contagious and even addicting. Because it gives you chemicals every time you react, every time you get outraged. So you become part of the narrative because it pulls you in. And as I progressed in my talk radio career, I realized, number one, that the station that I was on, and again, this is me being completely frank, is all narrative. It's all part of it. And there's a lot of money to be made off of it. That's the other part of this. Doing this, way harder. The money doesn't flow in. You don't have a built-in platform like you do for radio. So let's continue with Palahniuk here in narrative. With everyone's imagination atrophied, no one will ever be a threat to the world. That's the key right there. Because what does power hate most? Resistance. Not even necessarily in force, but resistance in the narrative. And what I am advocating is a resistance to both narratives. Because going back to Denzel, narratives are 90% BS. They just are. So we find ourselves in this position to be able to unplug and talk freely amongst ourselves and not have to frame everything how a political party wants us to frame it. Because what do political parties want most? To spend your money. Spend your money. Now, you might agree with where to spend your money with one side versus the other, but it never actually spends the way they promise that it will spend for you. Because this is one of the things that Mike and I disagree on all the time. He says Trump's numbers as how it was rate presidents, fantastic. I don't agree with that. Some of them are fantastic. Some of the economic numbers were fantastic, but that's also a product of low interest rates. A tax cut policy, which was awesome in 2017, that Republicans really muscled through and created in a very smart way to keep the economy growing. But when it came to spending, Trump spent more than Biden. Trump tried to bribe us with our own money, put his name on the check. So is that the numbers we're talking about? $8 trillion in borrowing? Because I thought we cared about spending in the Republican Party. I mean, again, that is a narrative that they create to do exactly what Palahniuk says. Republicans always say they care about spending, but they always end up spending more than Democrats. It's bizarre. Plus, Trump gave us the vaccine that didn't work. Remember, he tried to take credit for it, and all the Democrats hated it. Then the Democrats get in office, and they love it, and we end up on the other side not liking it. That's all narrative. That's it. Brendan, this is it, man. That is a great comment. You guys are awesome. You guys really add to what we're doing here. It is absolutely awesome. Making people turn into NPCs. For those not familiar, I might get the actual acronym wrong. I think it's non-player characters. Brendan, is that right? Just becoming a repetitive part of background environment. So if you play a video game, sometimes you act as the main character in a role-playing game. You go up to another character, and they might have one or two responses. If you've seen the movie Jumanji with, I don't know if this happens in the original one, but the newer ones with The Rock and Kevin Hart, there's an NPC in there that only has pre-programmed responses. That's the Palahniuk quote. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And trying to break free of all of this is difficult. It's challenging because you have to challenge your own notions. I try to do it not all the time, but I try to do it a lot. Because honestly, I'm not sure what's true anymore. It's way harder to find the truth than it ever has been. There's more garbage out there. Rumors that President Biden was dying over the weekend, and now, Biden's taller. Like, this is just nonsense meant to distract you. Biden's not an issue anymore. Biden's the president for a couple more months. That's it. If he makes it, he makes it. If he resigns, he resigns. He's not the story anymore. He's irrelevant. He's a lame duck. So why are we still talking about him? Narrative. So how do you break free from the narrative? Be conscientious of what you're reading. Be conscientious in that someone's trying to influence you, probably to vote a certain way or to be on a certain team. I never really bought into that team thing, but that's just kind of what we do in America, right? You got to pick your side, you got to pick your narrative, and you got to run with it. So here, back to Scott Adams. So this is talking about the 2020 election. Because he's onto something here in that the narrative is really impacting America and what's dividing America. And the big problem we have isn't just spending, isn't just government run amok, isn't the war on drugs. It's communication. We have a difficult time talking to anyone who has a different narrative. Because the more you watch the narrative, the more reinforced it becomes in your brain. The more reinforced it comes in your brain, the more your emotions get attached to it. And then you might communicate emotionally about it. And when you communicate emotionally, maybe it's anger, maybe it's snark, maybe it's dismissal. Maybe you end up saying something like J.D. Vance, that childless cat women are running the country and they're all miserable and they're making your lives miserable. Because the narrative, in order to be famous in it, you have to say outrageously stupid things so it gets retweeted, so it gets shared, so that people see it. Because if you talk rationally and normally, well, it's not exciting. Which is why I don't know if this is a good idea for Mike and I to do, because we're trying to do exactly that, inject some rationality into the hyper-partisan narratives that are out there. So what Scott Adams is saying here is that it's irrelevant that Republicans believe the elections were stolen or worked fine. It's only relevant that Trump and the protesters believed it was obviously rigged. That's what makes their actions preventing a coup instead of staging one. So it's all about belief systems. It's all about, because for the life of me, The January 6th narrative is fascinating. I understand some elements of it, but it's bizarre to me to celebrate that day as if it was some patriotic movement. It was not, primarily because how it's been used, but it just looks terrible. It looks like America is out of sorts, but we are. But to Adams's point, that's how they got you brainwashed. So his point is basically that Trump talking about the stolen election, having people come to Washington on January 6th is exactly how that January 6th happened. Because the brainwashing, you put Palahniuk's quote up there, if you don't give yourself any space to process what you're getting, and you're going to keep reading it and reading it and reading it, you're going to get emotional. You're going to get fired up. And then when the crowd gets emotional and fired up, you're going to join in on it. There's a great documentary on Netflix about the Woodstock 99. And this talks about narrative in a way, too. It's a 3-part series. And Woodstock 99 ended up being a disaster. It was not properly, what's the word? It's not properly, not funded. That's not the word. The infrastructure was terrible. They didn't have enough water. They didn't have clean bathrooms. So it descended into this chaos that was basically anarchy on Sunday night, the last night. And the way that they tried to explain it all is everybody has a different person to blame or event. It was hot. It was sunny. People got agitated. They ran out of water. So they started getting more and more agitated. The promoters promised a special surprise after the last act on Sunday night, but it was just a video. And then people just went bananas. Started burning things, burning trailers. Thankfully, it was isolated in this community, but it was incredibly dangerous. And the narrative that the promoters of Woodstock came out with was a few bad actors destroyed the whole thing. And they stuck with that. Was it true? It's probably more than a few, but to them, it was true. To the people on January 6th, it was true that the election was stolen. It doesn't mean it's factual. It just means that people believe that because of narrative, because of beliefs, because language is contagious. So go back to Adams here. The media never interviewed protesters about what their motive was. They took their narrative as insurrection. You were brainwashed into thinking we can know elections are fair ever, and that the intention of Trump was to stay in power via some paperwork about electors and some trespassing. Courts would have sorted it all out. It was a delay tactic to figure out if any obvious fraud happened. Trump left on schedule. Well, I don't agree with all of that factually because Trump is the master at it, right? He is the master at creating a narrative and getting people to follow along. But when it comes to strategy and winning elections, you have to get outside your own narrative. So how do you get outside of your own narrative? Again, understand, be conscious of what you're consuming, be conscious of when you consume something and you read it, what is that first thought that comes across your head? Go beyond that thought. Go to the next thought or clear that thought out of your head and try something else. That's the key. Or on occasion, you might just have to put the phone down. You might have to put your laptop down, close it up a little bit and just see. Because I think that, Greg, in many ways, I think this is both sides. Stockholm Syndrome. Believe they're captors, the corporate DNC. Because I've talked to many Republicans, Trump fans, who think that Trump is their way out of the current economic situation. That he and he alone is it. I mean, that's wishful thinking. That's putting your eggs in one basket. Because the reality is we all have to live in the world as it is, whatever the prices are. It's not ideal. And you have to figure out how to navigate around it. That's what I'm trying to do. And Grizz, I think you're right here. So, by the way, you guys have questions? You have, Greg, I saw your question about Tuesday's election. I'll get to that in just a second. But let's spend the last few minutes here. Let's do some Q&A. You guys fire away. Ask some questions. Because I think what I love about Grizz's comment here is this. Taking a breath is the best thing ever. The best free resource out there is just go. And in this entrepreneurial journey that Mike and I are on, it's sometimes hard. It's sometimes stressful. You're not sure if you're spending time doing the right thing. So what I find myself doing is taking a breath, and then I can focus on loving life, like Chris says. I mentioned this yesterday. I was making some tacos the other night, some buffalo tacos, and I'm putting some cumin on my tacos and some chili powder. And for some reason, I'm looking at these things, and I became so grateful that someone ground up this chili powder for me, that I didn't have to go do it. I just went to the store and bought it. Because when I think about that, and I think about where I'm at today and how I got here, it was a collective. It wasn't me alone. It wasn't just me fighting through the wilderness and getting here. I had two parents that loved me, that set me up to put me in a position to be able to chase the things that I want, to be a radio show host. And because of that, I was able to do it. I didn't really have any barriers in the way. And then I went out on my own adventure, and I had ups and downs, and I got all these different things that I got to experience because I chased it. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a lot of money, but I figured it out. I made it. But I didn't make it alone. My first boss, Andrew Lee, WSKY, The Sky in Gainesville, Florida, gave me my first opportunity. I got to know Andrew Lee because my cousin Rick, also in broadcasting, knew Andrew because they worked together. Rick knew that Andrew needed a part-time employee on the weekends. Just so happened that Amy, my wife, and her family lived about 45 minutes from that radio station. Incredibly convenient. So I take the job, and Andrew Lee, rest in peace, he died a year and a half ago, 49 years old. Oh, horrible. But he gave me my shot, and he let me grow. So that part-time position became, yeah, sure, do the news. Oh, yeah, sure. Put some weather in the system. Yeah. And that led to my first opportunity to fill in on the talk show. And then that led to me doing a 1-year anniversary special on 9/11, 9/11/02. I used that tape to get my next big opportunity in New Orleans. Dan Frazier, my boss there, took a shot on me. I was a 25-year-old punk kid, didn't know nothing from nothing. But I 1 in a million chance that I got that gig, and I got it. I don't know why. But again, I didn't do it all alone. But I did all of this outside of a narrative, outside of politics. Just like you guys have all done the same thing. I think because of these narratives, we get caught up in them. And we think that politics is more relevant in our lives than it is. And I was thinking about this too, because a lot of the narrative about Biden is this. Greg Meekin nailing it. By the way, check out Greg. Greg does some really good work. He's got some books out. GregMeekin.com. He's a big fan of Mark Lamb. He's always been a big fan of Mark Lamb. So he's got an analysis at GregMeekin.com. So go check that out. But Greg's right here. Politics is branding, marketing, narrative. It's all the same thing. And it works because our brains get attracted to easy, right? Simple explanations of things, which is why we have a two-party system, because it is easy. You don't have to overcomplicate it with too many choices. You don't have to think about 4 things or 5 things. You think about 2 things. I got to pick one. Now, granted, my entire life, it's always been picking the list of 2 evils. And we've just accepted that, which is fine. Maybe that's the way that it is. But going back to Biden here, the narrative is, oh, Biden is stepping away like George Washington. Give me a break. Biden is stepping away because he was going to lose. But everybody keeps saying on Twitter, maybe not everybody, it's a slight exaggeration, but Biden will be remembered in history as someone who saved democracy. And I started to think about that. And I started to think about, why is it when we learn American history, mostly learn about our politics and who our president was? Yeah, sure, we throw some innovators in there once in a while. Eli Whitney inventing the cotton gin. Thomas Edison, the inventor of electricity, even though Tesla's model was way better and Tesla's model is still used today. But it goes back to your point, Greg. It's not just politics that's branding. Branding is branding. Messaging is branding, which is why it's so important to get your messaging right, which is what I help people do now that I don't work on the radio. And I think about narrative, and I think about brand, and I think about messaging, and I think about how much it works. and how it influences us. That's just the part that is so hard to escape from, is just that. So I'm looking at some of your comments here. Yeah, let's do this. Boom. Shout out to moms. Making sure I got where I needed to go. And mom was always there, picking me up, get me to practice, making sure I could do what I wanted to do and able to do it. Absolutely. Again, having that sets you up. And that is outside of politics. It's outside of who the president is. It's outside of our American history that we basically only focus on through the lens of politics, which is faulty. Because it's us as individuals that makes this country great. It's not our politics. It's not our presidents. It's us. It's us that go to work. It's us that create new products, that create new industries. It's us that go to school to be able to get a good career, to raise kids, buy a house, spend money in the economy so that other people can make things. It's always us. But going back to that narrative, a lot of textbooks tell us, no, it's because of the politics. No. Tax policies. And tax policies are very important. Don't get me wrong. It's very smart to have smart policies in place for economic growth because prosperity is the answer to everything. But prosperity starts with you, because prosperity can be found in any economic condition, any interest rates. Prosperity can be found if you're smart and you unplug from the narrative and you focus on your own strategy. That's the point of breaking with the narrative, is to be free. That's the point. The point is to be you. And the point is to live it as best that you can. And how you do it, at least how I'm trying to do it, is I have my ideals and my principles, and my morals are based on that. And when my morals are in line with my principles, I'm living a true life that isn't impacted by Kamala or Donald, that isn't impacted by Nancy Pelosi or Richard Nixon. It's impacted by me. It's impacted by you guys in your comments. It's impacted by Mike, the people in my circle, right? That's what it is. So, guys, I know this was a tricky one, a deep one, but y'all know me. I like to get a little philosophical, a little crazy. So some questions. Let's see if I can scroll back up here. I know that, Greg, you asked a prediction for Tuesday, Mark Lamb versus Kerry Lake. I mean, my heart wants to say Mark Lamb's going to win. I just don't know because of narrative. It ties right in. Because, actually, Greg, this is a perfect example of how a narrative works. So when Kerry Lake came off of television and joined the Trump train, it was seen as tremendous that someone in the media, like Kerry Lake, would like and endorse Trump, campaign for Trump, and then run for governor and almost win. So because Kerry Lake is the easy choice, because she's so attached to Trump and that narrative exists, it probably prevents a guy like Mark Lamb, unfortunately, from winning. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I think Mark Lamb would make a fantastic senator for Arizona because I know Mark. Mark has let Mike and I see his entire police department, the Pinal County Sheriff's Office, unfettered access because he has restraint. But restraint is boring on Twitter, especially if you have Kerry Lake, who is got fiery rhetoric. Fiery rhetoric works on social media. Common sense does not. Trust me, I've tried. One day I feel like I'm going to break through and people are going to wake up and go, yeah, we need a little bit more common sense here. But I think, that's it. I think right here. How can you, Patrick? How can you? Because it's all narrative. It's all a story. And because we buy into it and our brain's like simple and we don't want to think too hard about it, it's like, oh, okay, great. That's why you see a lot of the political signs. If you live here in the Valley, a lot of them pointing out how Trump endorsed they are. And the fascinating thing, I think it's CD8, Congressional District 8. It's right next to mine. I'm in Schweikert's district in Arizona. It's CD1. So I think it's either 8 or 3. It's right next to me. Trent Franks is his name. He used to be a congressman. He's running again. Blake Masters is running. He ran for Senate against Mark Kelly and lost. That also was not great. But, Mark Kelly's got a cool narrative. Astronaut. Married to Gabby Giffords. Gabby Giffords was shot in 2011 in Tucson. So he gets the narrative. So Blake Masters now running for Congress. He's got signs pro-Trump, pro-Trump, pro-Trump. Literally says pro-Trump 3 times on the top of the sign. But he wasn't endorsed by Trump. Abe Hamada, who ran for Attorney General, is endorsed by Trump. He's got signs up to say endorsed by Trump. Blake Masters is trying to pretend he's getting Trump's endorsement to win because it's simple. Because many Republican voters will go to the polls and just go, which candidate is Trump telling me to back? Okay, got it. I'll just vote for all those candidates. Instead of really thinking outside the box and saying, Kari Lake has not changed at all. Hasn't changed her narrative, hasn't shifted towards the middle, and lost by 17,000 votes and has gotten crazier. And the fact that she's probably going to lose to Ruben Gallego in November is embarrassing. Ruben Gallego is a horror show. Terrible. That guy is how do I want to word it? Attention seeker. He is one of those people who say whatever he can to get elected. That's the truth. But he's got a narrative about being a Marine. Again, it's all about that narrative we're talking about here. All about it. So we'll see. I think it'll be closer, Greg, on Tuesday than I initially thought. I hope that that's the case. And I hope that whatever does happen, let's say that Mark doesn't win, that he sticks around in politics. Because maybe America will wake up, maybe Arizona will wake up and go, yeah, you know what? This is pretty bad. But I don't know that we will. Because going back to what Scott Adams said, going back to this quote, if 70% of America is completely distracted, filled up with nonsense, Kardashians included in that, we're not using our brains. We're not thinking rationally. We're thinking emotionally. We're thinking about our team. We're thinking almost in a religious sense instead of a Save America sense. But we'll see where we go. So Tuesday's coming up. Obviously, Mike and I will be back on Monday. Tuesday will be election day, primary day in Arizona. We'll have you some results on Wednesday. We don't know what kind of results we'll get by then, whether we'll have any declared winners or not. And politics is important, no question about it. And we're going to continue to talk about it because it's a brand new race. But we matter more than our parties. We matter more than the narratives. We're very smart people that are misled often because power is enticing. And once you get it, you want to hang on to it. And you'll do whatever you can to get out of it. You'll do whatever you can to stay there, I should say. Rhonda, how do I feel about our governor? That's about how I feel. I feel that she is really, in many ways, an irrelevant governor. Doesn't seem to be moving the state in any particular direction. Vetoed some things that seem strange to veto. But she is a Democrat. And the Democrats, again, if you saw this video, to Scott Adams' point, let me see if I can put it up here.
Et cetera, CNN. And these are...
So he's talking about the CIA, the captured media, the Democrat Party, and big tech, all together in the same part. Boom. That's how the narrative works. That's really the big challenge, on top of the fact that we can't communicate about anything. Thanks, guys. My name is Rob Hunter. Mike Russ will be back. If you can, share this out. It's an important conversation. Because in order to change this country, we're going to have to change ourselves. We're going to have to change how we consume information. We're going to have to change how we think about politics. We're going to have to get outside of wanting our side to win all the time and make it religious. And that's up to us. And I know that you guys are awesome. I know that Mike's awesome. I know that we will see you again on Monday at noon right here on Russell and Hunter's The Brewmance. Until then, have a great weekend. Have some fun. Unplug from the phones. laugh, watch something you love, hang out with people you love, and live. Livin, as Matthew McConaughey would say. Rhonda said it right. We'll see y'all Monday. Cheers.